Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of the Travel Host Hometown Tours Quick Take. This morning, local historian Michael Albrecht brings us an off-the-beaten-path segment.
Back in the woods near the historic courthouse district stands the Spotsylvania Confederate Cemetery, a final resting ground for over 600 Southern troops who fell fighting in the battles of Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, and Spotsylvania Courthouse. Residents may be surprised to learn that nearly one-third of the battles in the Civil War were fought in Virginia, and one-third of these battles were fought right here in Spotsylvania County. This hallowed ground pays tribute to the courage and sacrifice of those who went off to war and never returned. In the center of the plot stands a tall granite shaft crowned by a lone sentry who silently watches over the dead. A dedication to his Southern comrades is inscribed on one side with the saying, "Lest we forget," on the other. Several members of an elite group of cavalrymen known as the Jeff Davis Legion are buried in this cemetery. This group fought bravely at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse and were comprised of 3 squadrons, 5 Alabama companies, 3 Mississippi companies, and 2 Georgia companies. They are joined in eternal sleep by soldiers from all of the Confederate states. The nearby Spotsylvania Museum has a roster of Confederate veterans buried in this cemetery, as well as a list of other civilian burials there. Many of the markers are maintained by members of the local Sons of Confederate Veterans and the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The cemetery is open to the public and sometimes hosts commemorative events.
Look for local historian Michael Albrecht's upcoming book, Campfires at the Crossroads, Confederate Encampments of Spotsylvania County, as part of the History Press's American Chronicles series, and you can find out more information on his website, pinstripepress.net. That's pinstripepress.net. Next week, we will have a feature you won't want to miss, so keep tuning in to News Talk 1230 WFVA for this and all your local news and information. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of the Travel Host Hometown Tours Quick Take. This morning, local historian Michael Albrecht brings us an off-the-beaten-path segment.
Although it has been literally surrounded over the years by urban sprawl, Salem Church in Spotsylvania County remains one of the most significant sites still standing from the Battle of Chancellorsville. Like most churches in the area, Salem was used as a temporary field hospital by both sides during the Civil War. According to the National Park Service, on May 3, 1863, Union and Confederate troops fought a bitter day-long battle on a slight ridge a few miles west of Fredericksburg. At the vortex of this action was a small brick building known as Salem Church. After the battle concluded, the church was filled with the dead and suffering. One eyewitness recorded the horrors within the building, stating that hundreds upon hundreds of wounded were gathered up and brought for surgical attention. After the house was filled, the spacious churchyard was literally covered with wounded and dying. Throughout the remainder of the war, Salem Church remained both empty and ravaged. Its floors had been permanently bloodstained, and the damage to the sanctuary left it unsuitable for worship. The structure was slowly restored after the war and resumed its use for services until a new Salem Church was built in the 1950s. In 1961, the congregation voted to donate the old church as a gift to the American people. Today, it stands as a cherished landmark. Located just off Route 3, the original church building, 15th New Jersey Monument, 23rd New Jersey Monument, and 1 acre of surrounding ground are all that remain.
Look for local historian Michael Albrecht's upcoming book, Campfires at the Crossroads, Confederate Encampments of Spotsylvania County, as part of the History Press's American Chronicles series, and you can find out more information on his website, pinstripepress.net. That's pinstripepress.net. Next week, we will have a feature you won't want to miss, so keep tuning in to News Talk 1230 WFVA for this and all your local news and information. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of the Travel Host Hometown Tours Quick Take. This morning, local historian Michael Albrecht brings us an off-the-beaten-path segment.
One of the more frequently overlooked historical spots in our region is the Bernard Slave Cabin site, which is located about halfway down Lee Drive on the Fredericksburg battlefield. Visitors can access a hiking trail via the main road. This pathway winds back and forth through the woods for a half a mile and ends at a clearing near the Shannon Airport area. This field was the site of a small slave community. Although their cabins are no longer standing, there are a number of interpretive markers that tell the story of this unique location. The living quarters and their occupants belong to Mr. Arthur Bernard, the owner of Mansfield, a plantation house that stood about 1.5 miles to the east. In 1860, these cabins were home to about 3 dozen slaves. The entire complex consisted of 3 two-room structures, a stone-lined water well, and perhaps 2 additional outbuildings. According to the National Park Service, Bernard's Cabins near the Fredericksburg battlefield became an important Confederate artillery position on Stonewall Jackson's end of the line. The center of his line was wooded, preventing the Confederate leader from placing any artillery there. Instead, he placed a large number of cannons on either side of the woods and angled the guns toward one another so as to catch any Union troops who might attempt to attack the woods in a deadly crossfire. To the left of the woods at Bernard's Cabins stood 9 guns of Captain Greenlee Davidson's battalion. This battlefield site is one of the only in our area to specifically highlight the living locations and arrangements of local African American slaves.
Look for local historian Michael Albrecht's upcoming book, Campfires at the Crossroads, Confederate Encampments of Spotsylvania County, as part of the History Press's American Chronicles series, and you can find out more information on his website, pinstripepress.net. That's pinstripepress.net. Next week, we will have a feature you won't want to miss, so keep tuning in to News Talk 1230 WFVA for this and all your local news and information. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of the Travel Host Hometown Tourist Quick Take. This morning we hear from local historian Michael Albrecht about Fredericksburg's own pyramid.
One of the most interesting and original monuments on any of the 4 nearby battlefields is the Meade Pyramid, which is located on the opposite side of the railroad tracks just off Lee Drive near Prospect Hill. Now, this unique structure marks the only site where Federal troops were able to break through the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia's lines during the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of 1862. Though it is not officially recorded in the history records, the National Park Service claims that the 23-foot high granite pyramid dates back to 1897. During that time, the Confederate Memorial Literary Society wanted to place markers along the railroad tracks marking significant Civil War sites. Their design used a 90-foot pyramid located in Richmond's Hollywood Cemetery as the model. In 1898, the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad hauled over 17 tons of Virginia granite to construct the pyramid. Visitors to the Fredericksburg battlefield can see the monument by driving to the end of Lee Drive at Prospect Hill. There is signage nearby that explains the monument's legacy. I would like to add, though, that the nearby railroad line is still active, and it is highly recommended that visitors do not cross the tracks to get a closer view of the monument. The Meade Pyramid is just one of the many historical sites that are off the beaten path here in the Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, and Stafford area. For more information on all of the surrounding area's hallowed grounds and markers, both known and unknown, visit one of the area's visitor centers or exhibit shelters located on the battlefields.
Look for local historian Michael Albrecht's upcoming book, Campfires at the Crossroads, Confederate Encampments of Spotsylvania County, as part of the History Press's American Chronicles series, and you can find out more information on his website, pinstripepress.net. That's pinstripepress.net. Next week, we will have a feature you won't want to miss, so keep tuning in to News Talk 1230 WFVA for this and all your local news and information.